Greetings, fellow conspirators. It is I, LG Grande, the new number 6, the G-Man with my G-Plan, and you are a conspirator out there for freedom. Thank you for doing your part. Don't forget, visit us at YouTube. It's Liberty Conspiracy. On Facebook, while they let us exist, it's Liberty Conspiracy. And on BitChute, it's Liberty Conspiracy. And of course, you can always find my work at MRC TV, or if you want to reach me on Twitter, it's at Guard Goldsmith on Twitter. It's time for the Liberty Conspiracy News Scan. Let's get right to it. Well, first off, you can see right here, one of the fun ones from Brittany Hughes over at MRC TV. Virginia governor apologizes for not wearing a mask during photo op. My mask was in the car. Would that have been the blackface paint that he wore, or was that the KKK mask? I just don't know with the governor of Virginia. It's so difficult to figure out. But anyway, this is a great one. After catching flack for not wearing a face mask while posing for some outdoor photos with a few residents in Virginia Beach last week, after encouraging and even threatening to mandate face masks for in public for everyone else, Virginia Governor Ralph Blackface Northam has apologized, excusing his COVID-spewing ways by saying his mask was in the car. All right, I love it. Now, you probably have heard about this story from yesterday, but I do want to go over to Facebook just for the heck of it and give a big shout out to High Impact Vlogs and High Impact Flicks. Brian Young, he did a great job covering the story about that Staten Island shopper who was ganged up on, to use the passive voice, when she didn't have a mask on, and they all swore at her. Some people shoved her. Unbelievable, just unbelievable. I won't go into the video because it's about 12 to 18 hours old now. But if you haven't seen it, head over to High Impact Vlogs, High Impact Flicks. You can find them on BitChute, Twitter, YouTube, and so on and so forth. Now, this story: Hillary Clinton thanks Andrew Cuomo for, quote, making responsible decisions to keep people safe. I almost didn't include this because she's so dry and nasty and disgusting as a figure that you just, it's sort of like, I don't want to open up that old cabinet and smell that, you know, that moth-eaten wool. I just don't, no, let's not touch it. But I had to bring it up because as far as Cowabunga 19 goes, this is choice. And she's in the classic Hillary Clinton pose there with that fake smile, and it just makes you wonder how somebody can live his or her life in that way. I mean, all these people, you know, it's just, it's so artificial. How can you stand it? How can you continue to function that way? It's like, oh gosh, it's crazy to have to act like that all the time. Hillary Clinton lauded New York Governor Andrew Cuomo's response to the Cowabunga pandemic and thanked state leaders for keeping people safe, of course, in her home state. You know how much she loves New York. Carpetbagging, you know, Chappaqua, the whole thing. She just loves New York. It's great. In fact, I think she has she came up with the I Heart New York slogan back in the 70s, you know, what a great vacation. She was singing it. That was all her thing. Yeah, it was like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. She went back in time, did it herself after somebody else thought of it, and then she took the credit for it. Sort of like when she was named after Sir Edmund Hillary. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't even popular then. He hadn't even climbed Everest. Like, oh, yeah, you were named after Sir Edmund Hillary. I get it, absolutely. So anyway, I just thought this was great because, of course, Andrew Cuomo is the guy who has screwed up pretty much more than anybody in the United States, except the people in Washington, D.C., like Anthony you-know-who and Dr. Birxbox. You know what I'm saying? Anthony Cuomo has been, Andrew Cuomo has been, let's see, on the wrong side of masks, on the right side of masks, on the wrong side of masks, and he has demanded respirators from the federal government when there is no constitutional provision to provide respirators. He has ordered shutdowns of businesses, then said, gee, maybe we shouldn't have shut down businesses. An absolute abysmal mess, with possibly the capper being, of course, moving people who are infected or showed infection, possibly showed antibodies or infection. We don't know because we're not sure what tests are being delivered to people, whether they're antibody tests or they're actually finding infections or not. They could have been infected, showing antibodies, and are now asymptomatic and gotten over it and aren't spreading it. Who knows? We don't know what's going on because the government is involved. But anyway, and they have no incentive to actually do anything right, because they'll get our money regardless. That's great, isn't it? So anyway, yeah, he was one of the people who shipped sick people or positive people into nursing homes. Yeah, but Hillary Clinton says, thanks, Andrew Cuomo, for making responsible decisions to keep people safe. And on that front, here's a little news for you. Japan ends corona you-know-what emergency with only 850 deaths and no lockdown. Now, as my friend Tim, writer Tim Levin over in England pointed out on my Facebook page, he said, how do they know it's over? And I replied to that. I said, yeah, that's a good point. How do they know when it began? This is the problem. Because as we know, and I'll bring this up on my Facebook page. Let me just scroll up here a little bit. Oh, by the way, here's a great response to the Hillary Clinton thing from Jonathan. That's awesome. So true. So yeah, here's what I said to Tim. I said, I think the fundamental problem is how they define cases, and that has hamstrung the approach from the outset. From the early PCR tests to the false positives and false negatives for test kits, to some of the test kits themselves testing positive for the virus, we've seen a tsunami of tests for antibodies that might show current infection or might show a previously unknown infection, and just the antibodies that a survivor has in his or her system. So in fact, I think one can take a turn with Tim's insight and ask, how does one know when it began in certain areas? After all, in California, they discovered that many more people with antibodies, than they expected. In New Hampshire, they count people with antibodies as infected. But anyone who knows even the faintest bit about statistics in medicine and definitions knows that infected, positive for antibodies, and positive for the virus are all running in along different tracks in this situation. Sometimes they cross, sometimes they don't. Then there's the fatality rate. And since neither the numerators nor denominators can be determined, and since the U.S. government now subsidizes medical centers to list Cowabunga 19 as the reason for death, the entire picture is impossible to discern. And I will point out this, of course, I've had this in videos in the past, and you can find this online. These are some of the CDC instructions to some of the healthcare facilities. I'll put this up. You can pause this. I won't run through this too long because I want to make the news pretty short, but I've highlighted the pertinent portions. And of course, this is another CDC, National Institute of Health, guideline for how to list cause of death. This was actually given to the medical centers in early March. And that allows them to list things that aren't Cowabunga 19. Yep, just wanted to bring that up. So, there is the story. Oh, I'll give you this one too. This is a great little bit. Just to show this off. This dude, fellow voluntarist, of course, says, I'm now sponsored by Carl. He's a comedian. Now sponsored by Carl's Jr. You can't make this you-know-what up. I actually was required to wear a mask to get on a plane to Sacramento. I wore a Carl's Jr. burger wrapper over my face, and it passed the you-know-what test. This whole you-know-what scam is such a joke, and the jerk-offs that run the planet, i.e. Bill Gates and Fauci, are such idiots. And he goes on. It's great. You can freeze frame that if you want on the video. It's good for that dude. I don't even know who he is. David Knight had him on a show. It's frigging awesome. So good. Then there's this one. Lockdowns made no difference to Cowabunga virus, but destroyed millions of livelihoods worldwide. JP Morgan study claims. Very good. And there's this one, which actually brings us back to, I hope you will refer to the video that I put out yesterday morning at 7:45, that would be Monday morning, Memorial Day, regarding the so-called contact tracing in the United States and how that is being performed by governments which are getting people's medical data through the HIPAA Act that was passed in 1996 during the Clinton administration. And even though it was called privacy, it actually had written in the statute the fact that medical providers had to digitize their information and make the digital information available to state and federal governments. That is how they're finding out whether people are testing positive, and then they're applying these so-called contact tracers. Here in Italy, Italy creates social distancing army for 60,000 volunteers amid fears of a second wave of the you-know-what cowabunga virus. You gotta be kidding me. Unfriggin' believable. Mussolini would be proud. Then there's this one. This is just for yucks. Why not? It's bad enough as it is, right? You know, Gretchen Witmer. Yes, indeed. I think her middle name is Karen. I don't know. Witmer in controversy over husband's reported boating plans. Michigan Governor Gretchen Witmer faced backlash from Republican lawmakers. I hate that term. They're statute writers, not lawmakers. There's only one lawmaker. Eternal. After a reported request from her husband to get the family's boat out on the water before Memorial Day weekend, far from their home in Lansing. Witmer, a Democrat, famously has imposed one of the strictest lockdowns in the country, sparking frequent protests. What's more, she's told people not living in northern Michigan to stay away from vacation spots during the holiday weekend. Oh, I'm obviously paraphrasing here. Oh, and then there's this one. All right. This is the one on which I want to concentrate. Hey, who's that handsome guy? Who's that guy? Whoa! Huh? Yeah, I'm telling you, pretty cool. This is my most recent piece for MRC TV, as you can see up there in the corner. And they are great. I will refer you to my work for MRC TV anytime because they're awesome, and I love those folks. And so here is the story. Chicago threatens to condemn, possibly demolish churches defying lockdown. All right. So here is our timeless lesson. And I will expand on this to make its own video about this as part of probably a 2-video piece as I start to discuss Alan Dershowitz's argument that no one has a right not to be vaccinated. And he said that it's all part of the public health police power of the government. That was in his conversation on Crowdsource the Truth. So here is the story. The mayor of Chicago, let me go back here so I'm not prefacing too much here. The mayor of Chicago is arguing that, here it is, this comes from Chicago Sun-Times. Dr. Allison Arwady, the commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health, of course she was appointed by the mayor, sent letters Saturday to Metro Praise International Church of Belmont Cragen, Elam Romanian Pentecostal Church in Albany Park, comma, and that was in the original, that was lacking in the original, and Philadelphia Romanian Church in Ravenswood, warning that future violations could result in a church being, quote, declared a public health nuisance and potentially closed. Because, of course, the mayor has said you can't go out. Now, there is a lot to be said for the end of May for people who are Christians. We'll talk about that in a future time. But as far as the argument goes regarding the public health police power, she says, as I previously provided, the governor's executive order has the force of law. She says force a lot in here, and is enforceable by law enforcement agencies in Chicago and throughout the state. As I mentioned, this presents its little known political philosophical problem. Since, as I've noted to students under the founders' presuppositions, the executive branches of governments were supposed to execute statutes, not act as dictators. Okay, now, I want to focus here with you, fellow voluntarists, if you are, thank you for being one, on this concept of a state public health police power. I'm just going to read this out loud if you're listening to this in your car or something like that. No way. Here are some prefatory observations. Of course, some Americans, including Alan Dershowitz, who recently shocked many people by saying he not only believed all levels of government had the power to forcibly inject vaccine vectors into citizens against their will, but that he would argue for that in court if necessary, believed the so-called public health police power allows all levels of government to engage in such activity, even to the point of closing privately owned buildings and, as Dershowitz claimed, forcibly injecting people. But this so-called public health police power is not only constitutionally non-existent, it is constitutionally prohibited and philosophically off base. To understand, let's go back to the Declaration of Independence. In it, Thomas Jefferson explained that, as John Locke argued, and Locke was not perfect, no, by any means, and neither was Jefferson. Governments are formed, supposedly by Locke says, by people in order to protect life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The latter meaning private property and market exchange of that fosters prosperity. So, at first blush, couldn't someone like Dr. Awadi or Attorney Dershowitz argue that the government has a justified role in stopping the spread of a virus that could harm a life? Philosophically speaking, no, definitely not. The philosophical rationale for the government was to stop intentional person-on-person aggression against the life, property, or freedom of contract of other people. That's extremely important. The founders viewed it as improper for the state to demand tax cash in order to protect people from naturally occurring dangers. And doing so opens a Pandora's box to politically connected individuals and groups jockeying for position to claim that their natural disaster is the one that deserves government services. This is, of course, precisely how the U.S. government and state and local governments operate today, but it is a corruption of the original so-called rationale. And even if it were part of the American philosophical tradition, as foreshadowed above, and as seen in the Cowabunga 19 crackdowns, it becomes unworkable and ruled by arbitrariness and caprice. If, for example, government does have a justified public health police power and can tell people to stay home or not congregate with others in private buildings unless they show that they are not a risk of infection to others with a deadly pathogen, what happens when something like Cowabunga 19 is gone, but, say, common colds, often rhinoviruses or coronaviruses, still exist, and a portion of the population is immunocompromised? Will Alan Dershowitz or Dr. Awadi in Chicago demand that all citizens test negative each day before government doesn't punish them for trying to escape their domiciles? Does every transaction requiring human contact with an item also require a government check that said item is disinfected? After all, if the state has a police power to protect public health, as they argue, there's always a risk that a weak person could contract a natural pathogen from another human being. The key here is the difference between private property and public property, and compulsion and free will, a difference that Christ understood, and so too do many parishioners attending who worship him, attending the worship services of him. Private property is that which sees no tax money spent on it. It is that which we acknowledge and respect as hands-off, an extension of the sanctity of each other's lives and on which each of our lives depends. Making a choice to open one's private property to visitors is not an aggressive act, and neither is accepting such an invitation. And by doing so, one agrees to certain conditions and accepts or does not accept certain risks. If one wants to have a house party and be sure no one is carrying a disease, he can ask that attendees pass tests before entering. If one wants a less structured affair, he or she can open doors in a more indiscriminate manner. Likewise, if one wants to attend such affairs, it is up to him. It is only in the public, i.e. government, tax-funded areas, where we run into conflict because so many people are forced to pay for it and they all dispute how it will be run. And of course, government steps in, claiming police power, threatening liberties, choosing favorites, otherwise known as essential and non-essential, otherwise known as fascism, and not holding its own politicians and bureaucrats to the same standards. So it's not surprising to read this in Dr. Awadi's letter. Quote, "In addition, as the health commissioner, I have the power and duty to cause all nuisances affecting the health of the public to be abated with all reasonable promptness, and general police powers to correct by whatever means are necessary any health hazard that presents an immediate risk to the life or health of one or more citizens of the city of Chicago. Of course, reasonable is defined by the state, and you know what this means. I said, of course, the Constitution disagrees with her. The contract clause forbids her from infringing on the fulfillment of contracts, which would mean she can't order businesses closed if people bothered to respect the clause. And anyone who understands the Bill of Rights knows the terminology by whatever means are necessary. It's not only horrifying, it's blocked by the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th, 8th, and 14th Amendments. But she doesn't appear to care. In fact, by issuing her letter, the doctor implies that she could, if she desired, not only shut down the churches, but tear them down to, quote, protect public health. Christian Ionescu, pastor of Ellen Romanian, said he worries that the summary abatement threatened by Awadi's letter could lead to his church being demolished without due process. And it is a justified worry. The phrase, by whatever means necessary, makes it clear. Rights to life, property, and free will are not supposed to be servile to the prejudices of bureaucrats regarding whatever is necessary. It appears that many contemporary American politicians and bureaucrats don't understand that. That's right. Wrapping up the news. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. I'll leave you with this little bit. This coming from the great Brian. Let me just flash his image up there. What a styling man. Brian Young, High Impact Vlogs, offered this one. This comes from the Facebook page of a man named David.Low77. And he went into Walmart dressed like this. And here's Brian's narration, just real quick, about 20 seconds.
This is a classic example of old school mockery activism where you openly deride the mainstream narrative and those who blindly follow that narrative through partial compliance, as noted by the obviously medical grade CDC compliant masks.
That's awesome.
The result may not be effective because you end up looking crazy in the eyes of the Kool-Aid drinkers, but it definitely resonates with everybody who's looking at things through non-Operation Mockingbird influenced eyes, not to mention that it provides some comic relief, especially with the toilet paper necklace, to those who can see through all this regulatory totalitarian nonsense that's going on in the name of keeping the sheep safe.
All right, I'll stop it there. Brian, man, you're the man. And great job. Again, Facebook.com/ or whatever slash from Guns N' Roses, who knows. All right, Fash. David.Low. Hey, thanks so much for joining me, everybody. Don't forget, we're relying on you to spread the word about these videos and Liberty Conspiracy on YouTube and BitChute. Please do that. We don't address people through Liberty Conspiracy. I don't know why I'm doing this on Twitter, but maybe I'll open that up. Right now it's @GuardGoldsmith on Twitter, but please send these links out to a couple friends, email them, do it on Facebook, whatever you want to do, and then ask them to share those with a couple people as well. All right? Thanks, everybody. Hey, take care. Be seeing you.